by Canada.
But Trump's anger at the trading relationship goes way back. One of the earliest beefs of his first term over Canada's dairy industry.
The brewing storm. For years, President Donald Trump's relationship with Canada has been defined by a series of escalating trade disputes. The rhetoric, as expected, is fiery and aggressive. The latest salvo in this ongoing saga came in late June 2025 when Trump abruptly cut off trade negotiations with Ottawa, blaming Canada's dairy tariffs and the introduction of a digital tax for what he claims is America, once again getting the short end of the stick. But these issues aren't as simple as they seem. At the heart of this trade conflict lies a deeper ideological struggle over what constitutes economic sovereignty. For Trump, this is not just about milk or taxes. It's about fundamentally reshaping trade relations and dismantling what he sees as unfair systems that limit U.S. dominance. This brewing tension between the U.S. and Canada isn't a new phenomenon. Trump's disdain for Canada's dairy system stretches back to his first term, where he first began lambasting the so-called sky-high tariffs Canada imposes on American dairy products. Over the years, Trump has claimed that Canadian tariffs have reached an astounding 400%. For many, the numbers seem exaggerated, but Trump's message has been consistent. Canada's protectionist policies are detrimental to U.S. farmers, especially those in the dairy industry. The complaints started with a modest number, 270% tariffs, but by 2020 they had ballooned to even more jaw-dropping figures. The problem, however, is not as clear-cut as it seems. While the Canadian tariff schedule does show such high percentages, these rates only apply when imports exceed specific quotas, which are rarely filled. For instance, in 2024, Canada allowed 3.5 million cubes of yogurt to be imported tariff-free, but only 12% of that quota was used. For many observers, this technicality means that Trump's outbursts are based on misinterpretations of the actual trade flow. Yet, the political optics of Canada's supply management system, its controlled prices and guaranteed income for farmers, represent everything Trump opposes in trade policy. Supply management, a core tenet of Canada's agricultural policy, has long been a bone of contention between the two countries. As President Trump continues his crusade against what he calls unfair trade practices, dairy farmers in both the U.S. and Canada have become casualties of this trade war. The U.S. dairy industry had grown increasingly dependent on the Canadian market, which accounts for nearly 40% of North American dairy exports. However, with Trump's hardline stance and the lack of a clear trade agreement, uncertainty has loomed over the future of these exports. Buyers pulled back, and prices dropped, leaving many American dairy producers in dire financial straits. In Canada, the situation has been equally grim. While supply management has shielded Canadian dairy farmers from price volatility, the uncertainty surrounding U.S. trade policy has led to production backlogs. For high-volume dairy products such as ultra-filtered milk, processors have had to cut production lines. The Canadian government responded with a $6.5 billion relief package, but for many rural communities, this was little more than a temporary band-aid on a much deeper wound. The financial damage from the disruption of dairy trade has been staggering, with analysts estimating that losses from these disruptions could exceed $1.2 billion and continue to rise. Despite Canada's best efforts to defend its policies and withstand Trump's pressure, the broader implications of this trade standoff are being felt far beyond the dairy farms. The question now isn't just whether the U.S. and Canada will reach a trade agreement, but whether they can ever rebuild the trust that has been shattered over the course of this conflict. The digital tax dilemma and Trump's tactical advantage. As tensions between the U.S. and Canada reached a boiling point, the 2025 trade talks took another unexpected turn. In a move that stunned both sides, Canada rescinded its controversial Digital Services Tax, DST, a decision that was strategically timed to keep negotiations alive. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, under immense pressure from both the U.S. administration and key domestic stakeholders, announced the reversal just hours before the tax was set to take effect. This sudden shift was viewed by many as a major concession to the Trump administration, signaling that Canada was willing to soften its stance to avoid further economic fallout. The digital tax, which was designed to impose a 3% levy on large U.S. tech companies like Google, Meta, and Amazon, had been a point of contention for years. Initially, it was intended to level the playing field for Canadian companies by taxing the profits of foreign tech giants that had long been operating in Canada without contributing adequately to the Canadian economy. However, the tax quickly became a flashpoint in the broader trade war. When Trump got wind of it, he made it clear that such a tax would not be tolerated. He even warned that if the tax went into effect, he would impose sweeping tariffs on Canadian exports, potentially up to 25%. This kind of aggressive posturing was classic Trump. He didn't just use tariffs as a tool of economic policy, he wielded them as a weapon of political leverage. And as expected, the pressure worked. Within hours of Trump's ultimatum, Canada was forced to retreat. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne made the announcement, stating that Canada would formally cancel the digital services tax and introduce legislation to rescind it. This concession, coming after months of adamant refusal, highlighted the extent of the leverage the U.S. had over Canada. The decision to reverse course was not without its consequences. Many Canadian business groups, including the Business Council of Canada and the Chamber of Commerce, had long argued that the digital tax posed significant risks to investment and trade stability. These groups had been vocal in urging the government to rethink its stance, citing the possibility of U.S. retaliation. With the threat of a 25% tariff looming, it became clear that Canada had few viable options. In the face of this political and economic pressure, Canada chose to back down, at least for now. But while this appeared to be a victory for Trump, the situation is far from settled. Trump may have forced Canada to fold on one issue, but his broader strategy remains intact. For Trump, the digital services tax was just one piece of the puzzle. His ultimate aim is to renegotiate trade terms in a way that benefits the U.S. and undermines the protectionist systems of its closest trading partners, particularly Canada. The trade war over dairy tariffs may have captured the most headlines, but the digital tax saga is part of a larger, more strategic campaign to reshape the terms of trade in North America. Trump's strategy of relentless pressure and tactical maneuvers has put Canada in a difficult position. While the digital tax concession may have been seen as a diplomatic victory for the U.S., Canada's willingness to capitulate on such an important issue raises questions about what else it is willing to concede. With Trump's aggressive trade tactics and Canada's economic vulnerability, the real challenge now is not just how to resolve the current dispute, but how to navigate the future of U.S.-Canada trade relations under such an unpredictable administration. The digital tax crisis, however, is merely a prelude to even more complex negotiations ahead. Canada is not only facing economic pressure from Trump's administration, but also the growing realization that its trade policies need to adapt in order to safeguard its long-term economic stability. The stakes are high, and the outcome of this diplomatic struggle will have lasting implications for both countries: the automotive stalemate and the future of U.S.-Canada trade. As the digital tax issue began to subside, another battlefront in the U.S.-Canada trade conflict emerged: the automotive industry. This sector, which has long been a cornerstone of both U.S. and Canadian economies, found itself in the crosshairs of Trump's tariffs. In early 2025, Trump made his stance clear when he declared, "Every car sold in America should be built in America." This statement was not just a rhetorical flourish, it was backed by concrete actions. First, Trump imposed hefty tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, followed by a 25% tariff on all Canadian-made vehicles. For the U.S. president, the message was simple. He was done tolerating the cross-border integration that has defined the automotive supply chain for decades. The repercussions of these moves were felt almost immediately. The North American automotive industry, which relies on an intricate network of supply chains that span both countries, was suddenly confronted with crippling tariffs that disrupted production. The modern car is not built in one place. It is a product of cross-border collaboration. Parts sourced from Canada, such as aluminum, steel, and high-volume components, are assembled in the U.S. to create finished vehicles. This integration has allowed U.S. automakers like Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis to optimize costs, scale production, and remain competitive on the global stage. Trump's tariffs threatened to unravel this system, disrupting a partnership that had been in place for over 5 decades. The impact on Canadian manufacturers was swift. In Ontario, Ford and Stellantis paused production lines, citing rising costs due to tariffs and declining demand. General Motors shifted production away from its Canadian plants, opting to ramp up output in Indiana instead. The loss of contracts, particularly in specialized sectors such as tooling and molds, further strained Canadian industries. Analysts estimated that tariff-related losses for automakers could amount to billions of dollars, with Stellantis alone reporting up to $5 billion in losses during the second quarter of 2025. The Canadian auto parts industry, which supplies roughly half of its output to U.S. plants, found its order books drying up. Beyond the immediate economic losses, Trump's tariffs were also causing significant disruption within the U.S. automotive sector itself. The ripple effects were being felt in labor relations, as the United Auto Workers, UAW, expressed concern that rapid changes in production strategies could derail recent labor agreements and modernization efforts. The uncertainty surrounding tariffs and trade policies was threatening to undo years of progress in labor management relations. While Trump may have scored a political win with his aggressive tariff strategy, the long-term effects of this policy remain uncertain. The U.S. economy is deeply intertwined with Canada's, particularly in sectors like automotive manufacturing, where supply chains are intricately connected. By forcing Canadian manufacturers to scale back production or move operations elsewhere, Trump risks undermining the very industries that contribute to America's competitiveness. Additionally, by pushing Canadian investment away, Trump could inadvertently weaken the very sectors that drive innovation and growth in both countries. What's more, as Canadian automakers struggle to adapt to the new trade environment, American companies are also facing a dilemma. Some U.S. manufacturers have opted to reroute production to Mexico or abandon investment in North America altogether. The tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and vehicles, while aimed at reducing dependence on Canada, have instead pushed manufacturers to explore alternatives, none of which are likely to yield better results for the U.S. economy in the long run. This shift in production could ultimately backfire, as it may lead to the loss of jobs and revenue in the U.S. as well. As the deadline for resolving the tariff disputes approaches, the real question is whether the U.S. and Canada can find a path forward that benefits both nations. With Trump's aggressive stance and Canada's vulnerable economic position, it's clear that both countries are at a crossroads. The risk of a full-blown trade war with devastating consequences for both economies looms large. But there's also an opportunity for compromise, as both sides face the reality that they are inextricably linked through trade. Without a resolution, the cost of this conflict will not just be measured in billions of dollars, but in the erosion of trust and the long-term stability of the U.S.-Canada relationship. Ultimately, Trump's strategy has been clear: use tariffs and economic pressure to reshape the balance of power between the U.S. and Canada. But as the automotive industry, dairy farmers, and other sectors grapple with the fallout, it's becoming increasingly evident that this approach may have unintended consequences. The U.S. may win a few battles, but the real question is whether it can win the war without damaging the very systems that have kept its economy strong. In the coming weeks, both governments must navigate these treacherous waters. If a deal is reached, it will be a testament to the resilience of diplomacy and the enduring strength of the U.S.-Canada relationship. But if the standoff continues, the economic cost will only mount, and the damage to long-standing ties could be irreversible.